Got it. Thank goodness.
Good.
Today's meeting is co-sponsored by Fairbolt Canada. Our future CUSJ meetings will be on the fourth Saturday of the month, as much as possible.
While you were out, she just finished explaining how to change the name. Your name.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jim.
Oh, okay. Save the date set on Saturday, October 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern for our next interactive meeting in Zoom, which will be with Chris Scott from Dying with Dignity in Canada. Any suggestions for a great subject or speaker, let me know at cusjmedia@gmail.com. Today's team of co-hosts are Evan Rosamond from Fairbolt Canada, myself, Irene, Joy, Gary from the CUSJ board. This is our agenda for today. We'll have a chalice lighting, which is a traditional Unitarian thing. It's not usually very long. It's very interesting sometimes. Land acknowledgement, Gary will do that. Social justice issues from across the country. You can talk about what you are inspired by or what you're up to. And then a conversation with Mike. Then the question and answers after that. It's up to Joy now.
All right. We're doing this Chalice Lighting this morning, and I'm very happy to be with so many of you across Canada. Here I'm in BC and near the Vancouver area. So I have a chalice. I'm trying to find here. Can you see it?
No, we're just doing the chalice lighting right now. It's lit.
I'm doing the chalice lighting.
Yeah, just give us the words.
Yes. May the flame of our Unitarian Universalist chalice shed light on wherever we go and need to be to arrive at a new world of equity. May that new world be dawning very soon. So may it be.
Thank you.
You want me to read this?
Gary.
Okay.
We respectfully recognize and acknowledge the relationship that First Nation, Inuit, and Métis across Canada have with the land all Canadians live on and enjoy. This acknowledgement should only be the first step in eventually approaching restoring unceded land to the Indigenous nations that previously had sovereignty over these lands.
Thank you, Gary. Now it's come to the time where we're going to share our activities or your local actions. Please raise your hand in the reactions and turn on your video, and we can see what we can do to help you in your endeavors.
Irene has her hand up.
Since I look to be first in line, I think I'll start. I have three announcements that will be good news to Unitarians and others who recognize the beauty and interconnectedness of all species. First, Unitarian Universalist principles include affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In recent years, there's been a movement to change this affirmation to include all beings. At this year's General Assembly, 86% of delegates voted to amend the underlying bylaw to read, "Protect Earth and all beings from exploitation." Now, this still needs to be ratified by the different congregations, but it is certainly a step forward, and people in the Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry are very happy about this. And this change was championed by the UUAM and other concerned Unitarians who wish to include animals in our covenant of care. The second announcement is that the Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry is now in Canada. Under the umbrella of the Canadian Unitarians for Social Justice, the new Canadian chapter of the UU Animal Ministry is an online platform open to all Unitarians from all parts of Canada. We will be meeting regularly on Zoom to share ideas and experiences that empower us to broaden the circle of compassion to include marginalized groups of people as well as non-human animals. The third announcement comes from the UUAM, and it is for the annual celebration of the animals. The guest speaker will be Christopher Soul Eubanks, an advocate for climate, for people, and for other animals. His own experiences of marginalization motivated him to campaign for animals, and he describes his opening to animals as a spiritual awakening. This free virtual event will be held October 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to be putting all of these links in the chat. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Any other hands?
Joy, speaking on behalf of the new spiritual community that is forming in Vancouver. And we've come upon a new name that has not even been announced to our group entirely yet. But currently we're called the UU Futurists, and we're very proudly attending the CUSJ rally in Vancouver on, I don't know which day it was this week, Wednesday or Thursday, this past week. And we overwhelmed the anti-racist and trans group gathering nearby. And we want to continue to do that and highlight our activity across the country to help Unitarians show up for our trans people and all the people along that spectrum of gender diversity. By the way, for those who are new to the acronym CUSJ, it is Sexual Orientation and Gender Inclusiveness, or inclusion. I'm not sure which is the correct word. So it's a very hot topic and it needs attention. And that's what we're doing in our new group. Thank you.
Do I see any more hands up? I got.
Kate Chung.
Oh, it didn't show up in the front. Isn't that interesting? Okay, Kate.
Okay, just to say that there's so much going on in Toronto and Ontario that we're scrambling. Many members of Toronto First are attending various rallies opposing the things that the government is doing and dealing with the Ford madness. So there will have been people last week, and there will be people this coming Monday and Tuesday who will be joining the crowds down in Queen's Park area.
Thank you, Kate. Has anybody else raise their hand?
It's Kate.
No.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen again. I met Mike Morrice in the beginning when he was looking to become the candidate for the Green Party here in Kitchener. I wonder what that noise is. Oh, is that you, Joy? Do you want to mute?
Yeah.
Anyway, I met Mike, and he was one of the very first politicians that I really said, I like this guy. And I think we have a problem. But
I can hear you fine.
okay. Anyway, Gary, you should mute, I guess.
I'm trying to, and I can't seem to be able to. I'm going to sign out and sign back again.
Anyway, so he ran the second time and got elected one of the very rare occasions when my politician got elected, and I'm really proud of having Mike on board. Okay, I put it over to Evan.
There.
The host should be able to mute us all.
Yeah. Okay.
So Evan, you're on now.
Yeah. How does that sound? That sounds kind of bad. Oh dear. Okay. I first met Mike Morrice when I was walking across Victoria Park one day in 2019. He went out of his way to come across a piece of grass to meet me and tell me what he was up to and all that stuff. And this was months before the election period had started. So he's been working at that for a long time, but he had a lot of other interesting things going on before that. So one of my favorite politicians of all time, and I hope he's in there for as long as it takes to fix all our problems.
Okay, with that, Mike.
Well, thanks, Jim and Evan. That might be one of the kindest introductions I've ever received, whether in person or online. It's good to see you all this afternoon, and particular thanks for pushing through. I think through the pandemic, we all had to deal with a lot of Zoom calls, and the fact that you're all willing to join for another Zoom call, I think you're just indicative of your commitment to this advocacy, and so. Yeah, good to be with you all this afternoon. I appreciate that we had a territorial acknowledgement as we got started. I can speak for myself. I'm speaking with you from what is today known as Kitchener, but is Block 2 of the Haldimand Tract. It's a land that was promised to the Six Nations, as many of you are well aware, particularly those of you in Waterloo Region. It was promised to them in 1784. And most of it, 95% of it, has inappropriately never been paid for or to Six Nations. It was meant to be leased and instead was sold as land with full title. And this is a very present injustice that we're in the midst of. In fact, there was a walk this morning, a friendship walk with Six Nations as we sought to raise the profile of the court case, of the reality of this land and of this ongoing injustice. And so thanks for the good way that you opened today's conversation with, and for the invitation to be with you all. I understand this is kind of a joint thing between some Unitarian friends and Fair Vote Canada as well. And so I guess this week more than ever, we can say, people power is pretty important. The power of organizing, even under a false so-called majority. I think we just showed that Doug Ford may have the votes at Queen's Park, but he doesn't have 100% of the power. And when we have people power behind us on a campaign like we have with the Greenbelt, we can still win despite the brokenness of our electoral system. So for me, that's what gives me energy and hope in being on this call with you all, is that I know that you're all in the midst of your own organizing, and that when we put our concerted efforts and solidarity behind a common cause, we can win. And as was alluded to earlier, there's a lot for us to be working on collectively. So I'll be brief. I understand there's lots of time for questions. I think Jim asked if I'd share a little bit about our work on electoral reform and a little bit on housing. So I think I might just share some brief updates on those two fronts. I feel like I'm speaking to the organizers, so I hope it's not all things you already know. I hope it might be some updates for you, but then I think the really meaningful part of this conversation will be as we get into the questions and that, and if I can offer any insights for you all for my time in Parliament so far. As Jim shared, our community we did something pretty special 2 years ago in placing their trust in me as an individual and in the hundreds of people that helped in our campaign, and I take that pretty seriously. My team and I talk often, we'll just try to do as much good as we can for as long as we can. But it means that I've had 2 years in our Parliament now to better understand how decisions are getting made, and so open to any and all questions about that. Some of you from Waterloo Region know already, but for those of you from outside Waterloo Region, for me, I ran as a Green so that I would be able to hold on to my sense of self through this, that I could have a better chance of pushing back on all that I dislike about politics and try to stay focused on democracy. That is the difference between the partisanship of doing what parties, and I see it every day in the House of Commons. I see the pages when they drop off the piece of paper to other MPs that tells them how they're going to vote. Every euphemism we have for politics being a team sport, to me, that is part of what is eroding the divisiveness of our politics. But there's also good democracy that can happen when people put their communities ahead of their parties. And that's why I talk as much as I do about housing and about electoral reform and about proportional representation, because when I go door to door, as you heard from Jim and Evan, or just walk over to somebody at the park and say hello, in all those conversations, I got a chance to hear from folks about what was most important to them. And when it comes to our community, there is nothing defining our community the way the housing crisis is right now and has been for the last several years in particular. I'm sure this is similar for folks in other parts of the province, but I can speak for Waterloo Region to share that the number of people living unsheltered in our community has tripled since 2018, from just over 300 to over 1,000. I think our wider community is coming to grips to this as they see more and more encampments. But those of us who've been working on tenant rights for some time know that this is actually 3 decades in the making. It is ironic to hear someone in the House of Commons talking about common sense these days, because in my view, the origins of the current housing crisis can be traced back to someone else who talked about common sense in the province of Ontario in the early 1990s. And it was at that time that we saw provincial and federal governments retrench from investments in housing. And we've never returned to those previous levels. This isn't a new crisis. This is one that's been underway for many decades, but it's certainly heightened in our community right now. Another way of looking at it, particularly when we think about young people in our community, I think about my parents and when they bought their first home. When we compare the levels in 2005, the average house price in Waterloo Region was about 3 times average annual income. Today, the average house price in Waterloo Region is over 9 times average annual income, which is a way of saying, as many of you are well aware, wages have not kept up in any way with the cost of housing, which not only has an effect on buying homes, but of course has a trickle effect on the cost of renting also. Which means that whether you're a young person or even if you're well off enough that you might own your own home, we have nurses in our community. We have tradespeople who are saying they're leaving because they can't afford to live here. And so I don't think anyone is immune to the devastating impacts of a housing crisis that leaves, whether you're an artist, a healthcare worker, an education worker, if the people whose work allows our community to thrive can no longer afford to live here, that is a deep crisis for our community to push through. Now, we have the solutions. It doesn't take a whole lot of innovation. I lived in a housing co-op myself. I lived at Brighton Yards for several years. We know that housing co-ops are one option when it comes to social housing. Our social housing stock is less than 3% of our housing stock, which puts us at the bottom of the G7. In my view, what we need to be seeing is both provincial and federal governments and municipal as well investing in housing at the rates we used to see in years past, but then also addressing the reality that homes have increasingly become commodities for investors to trade. And they should be places for people to live first and foremost. Our housing stock should be, and it seems kind of so simple to say it, but it seems right now we need to be saying it. Homes should be places for people to live and not commodities for investors to trade. But we have had governments of different stripes at both the provincial and federal levels that have brought in place legislation and policy that has incentivized this financialization of the market. And to me, one litmus test that my team and I have tried to put forward to call for more than just the pretty words, but real action, is taking one type of corporate investor. Real estate investment trusts is one that we've sought to highlight in recent months. Real estate investment trusts are almost exclusively buying existing units, multi-unit residential in particular. They're not building new, they're buying existing. They're often raising rents and rent evicting folks, and they're doing well to increase their profit. But they're doing that on the backs of low income in our community who are getting rent evicted. And so something we've been calling for is to say, well, right now there's a tax exemption for these real estate investment trusts. We don't see the social value of that tax exemption. We had it studied by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It's about $300 million a year. It's a drop in the bucket on the overall housing picture. We're not saying this is going to solve the crisis, but we are saying that if the federal government were serious about addressing financialization, you'd expect this would be one of the first things that they would remove. And in fact, use those funds to then invest in the affordable housing that we do need. We put forward that motion over a year ago now and have yet to see it introduced as part of a package that would help address the housing crisis. And so that for me is indicative that we need more advocacy to put more pressure on the government. I'm somewhat optimistic with what I'm hearing from the new housing minister. I think he is more committed. And I think the governing party is looking at the polls and recognizing that they need to do more. And so it gives us a bit of an opportunity to be constructive and offer solutions. I'll now just turn to electoral reform briefly, knowing that's such a topic of interest to so many of you. And then I'll open it up for questions and discussion. I think already I'm probably spoken a bit too much. So I'll be brief to say that we have been able to get it onto the floor of the House of Commons. And this is working with Fair Vote Canada. It's been a lot of fun working with Anita and her team. I think Anita was on the call earlier. But by working with Fair Vote, we've been able to kind of make the most of opportunities as they've presented themselves. So I'm going to skip the part where I talk about why proportional representation is so important, because I think I'm preaching to the choir. If y'all want to hear more about that, we can talk about how the reality is that if you care about climate action, you care about housing, you have to care about proportional representation. We won't see governments that represent our interests until we make sure we address the way we elect people. And we know that to do so, we need to depoliticize this. We know that the Prime Minister promised over 1,800 times in 2015 that would be the last election under first past the post. And last time I checked, we are still under first past the post. So it's not a surprise that sometimes political leaders don't hold to their promises. And it also means that we need to advocate in order to have someone say that they were sorry and that they're going to follow through on their promise, as the Premier did just a few days ago. That doesn't happen overnight. That happens as a result of dedicated advocacy, often unpaid labor, where we collectively push back and we make the most of opportunities as they present themselves. And so on electoral reform, where I think Fair Vote has been so effective is identifying those opportunities. And one of them came up earlier this year when the Liberal Party of Canada had their convention. and had one of their riding associations put forward a motion to endorse a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. And as a result of that, I brought forward a motion that kind of mirrored what we knew would be at the Liberal Party convention in order to have something tabled in the House that MPs could demonstrate their interest in advance of voting on that motion, and also for all parties to demonstrate their level of support. And, it really is, I give all the credit to volunteers, primarily Fair Vote Canada volunteers, who reached out to their MP with a very specific call to action, and that was to joint second the motion. So by the terms of the House of Commons, up to 20 MPs can put their hand up before a motion is voted on to say that they believe in that motion. It's called joint seconding. And so that option was available to all MPs when I introduced the motion calling for a citizens' assembly. Over the course of, it only took us maybe a few months before we sold out. All those 20 spots were filled. We had one Conservative MP who ended up signing on, a number of NDP colleagues, of course, Elizabeth May, my colleague, as a fellow Green, so I guess 100% of the Green caucus was signed on, but then also several, in fact, probably about 12 of the 20 were Liberal MPs from right across the country. Fair Vote then actually hosted their own campaign site. I think you can still find it at, I think it's nationalcitizensassembly.ca. Someone can put the link in the chat, or as we do Q&A, I can always find it and throw it in there. And you could see it's up to 45 or some odd MPs. There's some procedural issues where if you're a junior minister, you're not allowed to sign on as a joint second. And so you'll see some junior ministers, they're called parliamentary secretaries, they're listed on that site also. So it gives you a sense of some of the momentum we built up through that motion. However, two realities got in the way. One is the reality of partisan politics. So despite that motion ended up getting voted on at the Liberal Party convention, the grassroots of the Liberal Party supported it at that convention overwhelmingly. It got even prioritized. You can imagine and for those of you that have been a member of a political party, you know how much work it takes to get your motion prioritized. So not only did it get prioritized for a vote, it then was supported in that vote. So it's now Liberal Party policy to support a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. Thanks to Fair Vote, we got media attention on that. The Prime Minister was then asked about it by the media shortly after. I asked about it in question period the very next week, and I got a frustrating response, which was essentially a way of saying my way or the highway. The Prime Minister said, I am totally happy to have this conversation if we can have consensus on a winner-take-all, first-past-the-post ranked ballot, which of course has not been recommended by anybody ever. And it's my friends at Fair Vote who've helped educate me on how that actually can make things worse. If we look at the Australian Senate, I think is the best case study of actually how more divisive and how deeply entrenched two parties become under a winner-take-all, first-past-the-post ranked ballot. But the benefit there, we at least got the Prime Minister on the record. It was a fairly candid response, more so than I have seen most days in the House of Commons. We can share that clip also. I assume most of you have already seen it. But that is a reality we're still facing, is a clear disconnect between the grassroots of a political party and the policy that the Prime Minister's office is willing to continue to entertain. The second roadblock we faced is just procedural, which is that MPs draw numbers for who gets to present their motion or private member's bill first. Every MP has one opportunity, but there's 338 of us, and I drew a bad number. I drew 184. It's very unlikely our parliament is going to continue long enough to give me a chance to introduce and bring my motion for a vote. I've introduced several. They can be great tools to build momentum around, but I'm the first to admit that it's unlikely that I'll be able to take it to a vote. The good news there, though, is I was able to find a friend who drew a better number. Her name is Lisa Marie Barron. She's the MP for Nanaimo Ladysmith. and she was willing to take this as her top issue. And she now even has a date. I think her first reading of her motion, which is an adaptation of the one I introduced previously. Amazing what you can get done when you share credit. Happy to do so. To me, the more the merrier. Some things are far more important than pretending one person's going to get anything done. Lisa Marie's been great to work with, and I think it's like late November she gets her first hour of debate, which means the vote should be February at some point, depending on how everything kind of shakes out. But the good news is we're able to kind of overcome that procedural barrier by working together. And this also means that we're going to have every MP on the record, at the very least, for whether they support. And to me, this is the most obvious. How can you not at least say that we should depoliticize this issue, that we should have a citizens' assembly to at least make a recommendation back to parliamentarians on how we look at electoral reform. I think Fairvote's done well to find the most constructive paths for us to continue to build momentum. And I think anyone who's upset with the provincial government right now needs to recognize that they only got 18% of Ontarians voting for them, and they got 100% of the power, at least at Queen's Park, in a formal way. And so anyone who's upset with what's happening provincially, whether it's with respect to workers' rights, whether it's with respect to nurses' pay being capped, whether it's with respect to the Greenbelt, climate action, you name it, we should be galvanizing folks to recognize that this is as a result of a very distorted electoral system that we inherited from Britain, and that most other countries around the world have already moved away from. And so it at least gives us a moment, particularly for those of you who are coming in from other parts of the country. For those of you that are in Kitchener Centre, I can commit to you I'll be supporting this motion. But for those of you that are in other ridings, this gives you something to engage with your MP on. Very specifically, I'd encourage you to reach out to your MP to ask for a meeting, and in that meeting, make the case with respect to your interest, not in just using the right words, but in voting for this motion. Maybe someone could put the motion in the chat. I think it's motion 86, but we can get you the link. Fair Vote Canada will be continuing to do that over the coming months. But to demonstrate to your MP that their constituents, that you expect them to continue this conversation in a cross-party way, to depoliticize what is a very important issue. I'm amazed when I still knock on doors to this day, the number of people who remember the promise from 2015, who remember that they might have voted in a particular way as a result of that commitment. And so both because this is important for our democracy, because it's important for people's voices to be heard, but because promises matter, because our democracy matters, this gives us something to continue to build momentum around over the coming months. Spoke longer than I expected I would. I hope that's a helpful summary, maybe fills in some blanks for some of you. It might have just been a recap for many of you. But I think I'll pause there, Jim and Evan. At least that's a starting point on housing and electoral reform. Happy to take questions if people have them. Also happy just to kind of organize with you and plan with you. We have folks from Fair Vote here. I see Anita in the chat, so you might even, we can bring, I'm not sure if it's allowed, but maybe bring Anita into the conversation also if organizers are open to that. But just my thanks again. Thanks to you, Jim, for reaching out and asking for me to be a part of this. These are kind of fun. So thanks for having me, and I'll turn it back to you, Evan, for how you'd like to move ahead with the conversation.
Good. All right. I think we're ready for a show of hands. Anybody got some topics they want covered that haven't been done into the ground yet?
Okay, we have Dave first. Dave Matthews.
Hello, I'm from Elmira.
By the way, please stop. I'm sorry, Matt. Everybody, you have 2 minutes in which to speak.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in Elmira, just a little bit north of Kitchener, but in particular, more importantly, I'm in Waterloo Region with Mike. And I think we have a very unique opportunity in Canada, in Waterloo Region, with the resources we have to make some connectivity and further advance the interests of electoral reform, in particular proportional representation, with having the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics on Caroline and Herb Street, and then across that Herb Street is the Center for International Governance and Innovation. I remember telling a friend of mine, it's our responsibility as citizens of Waterloo Region to build a virtual bridge between those two institutions. One of those would be to advance proportional representation by recognizing that the abundance of scientific technology and science in general basically supports representation in its technology. Basically, it's the amount of data, access to information, access to basically people and their collective knowledge. That's what we need to advance our government. So I think we have an opportunity to take a scientific perspective on that. I have extensive notes that I've collected over the last 3 years now. I'd like to have that conversation with Mike at some point in time as a citizen in Waterloo Region, because I think there's an outstanding opportunity, and that should be the top priority of Waterloo Region in particular, to be the leading region in the country of Canada to advance this initiative. And by gaining access to those in the Perimeter Institute that have this scientific knowledge, and connecting with others across the street on an international perspective, where their knowledge is in political science. I'm not sure how much science is actually in the political side, but I have
2 minutes, you're up, Dave.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that point there.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
And now, do you want to respond, Mike?
I'd love to. Yeah. Well, thanks, Dave, because you've helped prove my point of the kind of organizers we have on this call. Dave, your name came up this week again as someone I need to be speaking with. So glad you're here. I guess I do want to admit, though, if we did a vote right now on a National Citizens Assembly for electoral reform, and just the 5 MPs across Waterloo Region were the only 5 to vote, would we win? I'm not sure. And so I think particularly for yourself and for others that are here in Waterloo Region, yes, we've got CG and the Perimeter Institute that we've got lots to be proud of, but on this issue, can we be proud that our elected representatives would support something that is so obviously, the research has been done. This is not about the technical rigor. This is about the political will that we need in our community. And so seeing how many people are here from Waterloo Region, knowing that Dave, your MP is MP Lewis, of course, and I'm sure you've got a relationship with him, I would just really strongly encourage, I'm happy to have that conversation with you, but I'm also really keen to make sure that those who are accountable to you get to hear from you. I really love, Anita's already put in the chat that link to, organizing a meeting. I would like to think that when we get to this vote, that Waterloo Region is going to be on the right side of this. And Dave, you're absolutely right. I see myself as representing Waterloo Region. I understand political constructs being what they are, that I represent my formal accountabilities to Kitchener Centre, but Kitchener Centre isn't a community. It's a political construct for the Constitution to have 100,000 people that I represent. But my community, I identify as someone from and speaking for and with Waterloo Region. So when it comes to having Waterloo Region's voice heard, there's 5 of us across Waterloo Region that need to be working together to advocate on issues. And I think it's something that we should be thinking about across Waterloo Region to say, have we got even support across the 5 MPs for Waterloo Region for electoral reform, and for all the advocates across our community? Can, you know, to what extent can there be a concerted effort placed to build that? I think that's, you know, really, really important. I'll put my email in the chat so that, Dave, if you did want to reach out and have a 15-minute conversation, if there's a paper you want me to read, I'd be happy to do so. It's one of the fun parts of this job is I feel like I'm always learning. And so I'll throw that in the chat now for you or for others. If there is something you want me to take a look at or a follow-up conversation you'd like to have, I'd be happy to do so.
Okay,
Thank you.
Isabel?
Hi. Yeah, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I took a course that Laurier put on by a political science prof that was excellent on electoral reform. And one of the most obvious demonstrations of the need for change was this great video series using voting in the animal kingdom. It was humorous, but very, very, it was a great explanation. But the frustrating thing was we did a vote before the course and a vote after, and it didn't change. I was just flummoxed by that. One specific question is, have you discussed this with Jagmeet Singh, and where is he on it? Because the NDP holds the balance of power right now. The Liberals need them to cooperate with them. I know I'm an NDP supporter, but I would certainly vote for you in Kitchener Centre. They have that opportunity to put more pressure on Trudeau. And this is such an obvious thing that it would help the NDP, the Greens. And one of the arguments raised against a lot of electoral reform is you get these fringe parties. There are ways around that. You can have a minimum number of votes that you have to get. So it's a stupid argument. I'll leave that for you as a question, but on housing, another problem I see is we've got all these condos going up that are expensive. They're fancy. What we need is basic housing. There's nothing wrong with growing up in an apartment. I did. You need 2 and 3 bedroom apartments so that a family.
30 seconds.
What's that?
30 seconds.
Oh, that's just another thing that needs to be covered. But the right thing, I didn't know about that. So that's great. Done.
Thank you, Isabel.
Okay.
Okay. You want to respond, Mike?
Sure, and feel free to give me time too if I need to. You tell
All right,
me as I need to be.
I'll give you a minute.
Okay. Well, on the first question, it's such a good question because it gets into the specifics that every MP and every party has more that they can do. And we need to be calling for those specifics. So when it comes to the NDP, Isabel, I think you're right on. I really appreciate Lisa Marie Barron for what she's done to bring this forward. And they hold the balance of power. And we can admit to ourselves, you know, they're low in the polls. So I imagine the NDP aren't keen to break that agreement. But the fact is that they are propping up a minority government based on that agreement, and electoral reform isn't in it. And so that's a decision they've made, a negotiation they've made. They maybe feel it's not possible to get electoral reform in it, but this is the same thing when it comes to the Canada Disability Benefit. Some of you might know I've been really pushing hard for a guaranteed income, focusing on people with disabilities, and that's not in the supply and confidence agreement either. And so while I appreciate where the NDP has stepped in, I think it's a very fair question to be asking of when does the leader talk about it, and how are you prioritizing this issue? And that's what I mean when I say we need to be specific in calling for action, and I hold that responsibility as well. I need to be specific about what I'm going to do to follow through on commitments that I've made to our community. I hope to be, clear with you all about that, and I think others need to be doing the same thing. And certainly, it's an area where if someone here is represented by an NDP MP, that is something you can bring to them in your advocacy to them. On the housing side, yes, this is why I just really have been focused on calling for money for social housing, for subsidized rental units. We need to see, if you know of what Indwell is doing with congregations downtown, for example, with what the Working Center is doing with their renovation at Victoria and Weber, with the House of Friendships, not just shelter care, but their redevelopment on Charles Street. Those are the kinds of units that government money, in my view, should be most focused on. And that's what I'm going to continue to keep calling for.
Thank you.
Can we have Stephen?
Yes, hi.
Okay,
my name
I'm
is
timing
Stephen.
you, Stephen.
I'm with Fair Vote Canada, volunteer there. And my question is kind of procedural. When your motion goes ahead, or when Lisa Marie's motion goes through, you said around November, what happens after that? Let's be optimistic and say that it gets passed. What happens from there on as well? Like if it gets passed, is it something that automatically is accepted and there will be a citizens assembly? So if you could kind of clear that up for me, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. It's a great procedural question, particularly around expectations. So a few steps to your question. Number one, what we know in terms of procedure. So motions need 2 hours of debate before they are then voted on. And so we know the first hour of debate will be on November 21st, I believe is the date I got by email. The second hour is less clear, but likely in December. And that's what leads us to speculate that the vote will be February or thereabouts. Now, the words of the motion you'll see in the chat is that we call on the government to take an action. Motions are different than legislation in that government's not actually required to act. And so, in fact, there are other ways, back to the earlier question, the NDP could actually, they get 2 opposition motions every session. They could bring this forward as their party's opposition motion and have a vote on it. Instead, we're doing it as a private member's motion. But to your point, Stephen, it is true that it would be possible that MPs would vote in support of the motion. The government is not required to act. It does create political pressure. So on foreign interference, for example, this is what happened. We had a motion on calling for an inquiry into foreign interference. And shortly after, David Johnston stepped down saying, I don't have the confidence of the House. So it is one way of demonstrating that parliamentarians representing Canadians across the country, when Parliament calls for an action, we have significant pressure on the government. However, key asterisks being they're not forced to act. It is the governing party who still makes that decision. The other reality is if the vote were to happen tomorrow, I don't think we would win. And so I want to be careful not to raise false expectations, that we need significant advocacy if we are to have a chance of swinging this vote. We have the 2 largest parties who have made clear that they don't currently support it, and those 2 large parties have a large majority of the votes. So what we need to see happen, and this is why I think you saw from Anita in the chat, there's a particular interest in volunteers meeting with Liberal and Conservative MPs, is we need enough Liberal and Conservative MPs to vote with their constituents and break so-called party line, even though in the Liberal Party, this is their party policy. So we just need them to vote with their party policy and vote with their constituents. And we need enough of them to do it. We need 170 votes. And so it is a significant undertaking to try to get there between now and February. And so it's a stretch. But those that have been advocating any electoral reform know that this is not for the faint of heart. It is deeply partisan, and it's going to take a lot of work. But we've got a moment here. So hopefully, does that help clarify, Stephen, for you procedurally? Have I clarified what it takes to get there, what we get if we win, and I guess also how much work we have to do to try to win this?
Yes, it clarifies it, but how does Daniel Blakely's previous committee, I know that's finished, but they did get a committee to discuss it and pass it. So how does that fit in?
So that was a recommendation from the PROC committee in a previous parliament. So it fits in as another moment, unfortunately an unsuccessful one though, in that again, there is no requirement for the government to act on that recommendation, and even less so because it happened in a previous parliament. Another tactic that Fair Vote is considering would be to attempt to have PROC pass another similar motion. So it would just be a different tactic. What is special here, though, is that I believe this is the first time, and Anita will be quick to correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but this will be the first time that we're not having this discussion at a committee, but on the floor of the House of Commons. And in doing so, this is what has, whoever your MP is, and it's almost certainly a Liberal if you're in the Toronto area, your MP will now be forced to vote on this and won't be able to avoid it by not being on PROC, for example. So that's where this has the potential, if Andrew Coyne and others in the media were to talk about it more, if we were to get some leading conservatives who have, we've seen Michelle Rempel-Garner write a Substack on proportional representation. There's a bit of a moment for a national conversation that comes with a vote on the floor of the House. But it's just another tactic different from and in addition to the PROC motion from a previous parliament, which is really the shoulders of giants that we're working through, right? As a new MP, I'm just thinking, how can I best use the influence I've got to build on all of the advocacy that Fair Vote and volunteers across the country have been doing for so long? So thanks to you, Steve. I'm not sure how long you've been involved, but it's Fair Vote volunteers who've helped get us to this point.
Thank you for answering, and I'll be going to see my MP as soon as I hear back from them with a date, an appointment date. Thank you.
Okay, Gary.
Gary, you have 2 minutes.
I'm very short. One, I wanted to talk about co-op housing. I'm in a co-op house. So as you probably know, our expenses don't have a profit part to them. So we only deal with what we need to buy to maintain our housing. And hopefully when we take the land out of the market, it stays out of the market. So it's not the big marketplace where so much profit is made. I have a specific question about the National Grid. You talked about a group in Parliament that you were in, and I was wondering if you could mention the people in that group, so that we know who's working towards having a fair vote.
Yeah, I think you might be referring, Gary, to the people who joint seconded my motion.
At least. So if it's a larger group.
Absolutely. So 2 resources I can give you for that. The first is, if you look in the chat, I put a link, the most recent link I added, I wrote my original motion. If you click that link and scroll to the bottom, you'll see in chronological order every MP who joint seconded that motion, as well as the date that they put their second in. And you'll see it's only the 20 because, like I said, that's the cap on the number of joint seconds that are allowed. So you can see for yourself on that page who was kind of first to support. And then also you'll see Anita added a link to nationalcitizensassembly.ca. I'll just re-put it in the chat so it's, oops, that's the wrong copy and paste. 1 second. This shorter link here. It's not working, of course. Maybe Anita, you could copy and paste. But at that National Citizens Assembly website, you'll see the full list of every current and former MP who has supported a Citizens Assembly. And you'll see it's a longer list because we maxed out at that 20. So you can see for yourself if your MP already supports it. Feel free to write your MP an email. If you're in the Ottawa area, if Yasser Naqvi, for example, is your MP, Gary, it's always nice to get an email just saying thank you. It's great affirmation. When I receive one of those, I think, okay, I'm on the right track. People are seeing it. I always worry that it's not just about doing the work, but I need to make sure that folks back home know about the work we're doing. And so both that we know that there are constituents who support us and that constituents are seeing that work. It's never a bad idea to send a thank you. But if your MP, I think Jenna Suds is also on the list. So there's a number of Ottawa area MPs that are Liberals that have supported. And if your MP isn't, you can consider reaching out. So Gary, that should give you the list of those who are already supporting at that website.
I appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
So Kate.
Hi, this is with regard to housing. The other aspect of housing that people don't seem to be aware of is the crisis in accessible housing. And I want to thank you, Mike, for sponsoring the Accessible Housing Network's petition to the House of Commons to try to get the National Building Code changed to require that all new housing be fully accessible. Something that people don't understand is it doesn't cost any more.
I know.
CMHC has done reports showing that if you're going to build a new apartment, for example, it costs exactly the same whether it's accessible or not. And 25% of Canadians have a disability. The trouble is that the roadblock is every level of government blames all the other levels of government. So one of the things we'd like to see is an MP, an MPP, and a city councillor in the same riding sit down together and hash this out. When are they going to, put their heads together and end this roadblock? It would be a great help if you could help us to find the writing in which they all agree. And thank you very much for sponsoring the petition, and I'm putting it in the chat.
Thanks, Kate, for raising it. I was about to put it there too, because it's still open.
Yeah.
And so it's a really helpful point, because I think that's one of, I'll admit, my misconceptions also. I had previously understood that a more accessible unit would be more expensive, but really what it's actually about is the thoughtfulness to ensure we're building accessible units from the start. And we need to recognize that the housing crisis is deeply intersectional, which is a way of saying it's made worse when someone is a person with a disability. It's a longer wait list if you're an Indigenous person, for Black and racialized folks. So we need to recognize that we're in the midst of a crisis in Waterloo Region. It's an 8-year wait list for housing. Well, it's a 12-year wait list for an accessible unit on top. And the only way we're going to address that is by building accessible units from the start. And that's where I thought, this person came to us with this idea to say, let's just address it in the building code. And I'm going to continue to push for doing so through that petition and through our ongoing advocacy. In terms of a place to start, I can't say I have a one location in mind. I do know some MPs who have put their energy behind standing alongside people with disabilities. And so maybe you can consider thinking about where there is a federal MP and then try to drill down to provincial and municipal support. In terms of federal MPs, I can send you a letter of the 76 people who jointly supported the Canada Disability Benefit originally. I know Ariel Kayabaga, who's a Liberal MP in the London area, her motion is on housing for people with disabilities. So I wonder if Ariel, if you've got friends in the London area, she's someone that comes to mind. It's also in Ontario that might have a particular interest. And Kate, I can send you a text of her motion. There's a great city councillor. Her name is Skylar. Skylar's last name is escaping me. But I'll send you a link to Skylar, and maybe there's a starting point for you. But it also takes local grassroots organizing. So it's not just having that political alignment, but it's also about having the local volunteers who have the accountability with those political representatives. So I'll send you some links as a starting point for you to consider as you try to find that right mix of people. And certainly if you think about something in Waterloo Region, we've got Catherine Fife representing the city of Waterloo provincially. I think we've got some great advocates on the City of Waterloo's council, which happens to be a majority of women, and they seem to be working pretty well together. Maybe there's something in Waterloo. I guess that's a bit of my bias to have good advocacy happening here in Waterloo Region.
Okay, thanks. And if you send those things to the Accessible Housing Network email address, I monitor that. So I'll see it. One point I'd like to make, number one, that no tax dollars should ever create accessibility barriers. So every bit of money from tax dollars that goes toward housing should require that housing be universal design so anybody can live there. Because seniors and people with disabilities pay taxes like everybody else. So why are taxes building housing we can't live in? The other thing is, it's not just subsidized housing we're talking about. We're talking about all housing, because I, as a retiree in a condo, cannot find a condo to buy that is accessible. So it affects everybody at every level of income, every price level of housing, every kind of housing. And in Australia, they just passed a new building code that requires that all new housing, starting in October this year, next month, that every kind of new housing that's built in Australia must be universal design. So there's no reason why Canada can't do that too.
So Audie, did you have a question?
If I can just finish with Kate, easier
Sure.
for me, Kate, than a separate email afterwards. It's just to put it in the chat. So I put both those links there for you. Both the list of the MPs and Ariel's motion is there. Feel free to share it with whoever you'd like.
Thanks.
You bet.
Audie, did you have a question?
Well, just a comment. I've been living in a country here called Finland, which has a proportional representation for 30 years. And on the issue of accessibility, I think there has been a great deal of progress, and I'm sure it's because we have proportional representation. You can hardly find a building which you cannot get into with a wheelchair in anywhere in the country now. Then I came here in '73, and most buildings were inaccessible. And I know, especially among the Greens, there has been a strong lobby, and they've had MPs in all the time advocating on the accessibility issue. Now we have, in other ways, we have a horrible government just been elected and is adopting a broad austerity budget and cutting back rent subsidies and doing all kinds of horrible things, and is very racist. So it's not the answer to everything, but a lot of things, especially related to minority groups and disabled people, seem to have broken through over the decades. Perhaps you can address this idea that populist voices will suddenly become get into the public sphere and get into the mass media and so on. I'm convinced many of the people we have elected in the current parliament will not have gotten elected in the past the poll system. So there are some flaws or things we need to think about. Of course, in Canada, we have that other backstop, the Senate. That's the other part of what you need to do, right? Is to change the electoral system. The last time I was in Parliament Hill, I got ordered off because of a protest I was involved in, because of my MP Bruce Heyer had passed a climate change bill, which was stopped in the Senate. So what is the strategy for the other half of this political reform to make Canada a democratic country? That is, what are we going to do about the Senate?
Audie, Bruce's bill is the one I first thought of when you started sharing about the Senate. For those of you that aren't aware, this was around 2011 or so, and it was in a minority parliament. It was a minority conservative parliament, and all opposition parties got together to get it was a bill. It was a climate change accountability bill passed that would have required targets of the federal government. It passed in the House, went to the Senate, and it was one of the few times that without even debate, it got killed in the Senate. And yeah, it was a huge disappointment for so many of us when an unelected group of people voted against the elected interests of our parliament. And so I don't have an answer for you on it, though, Audie. I'm not even convinced that for Kitchener that my constituents would want me prioritizing Senate reform ahead of proportional representation. Not to say we don't need progress made in the Senate, but I think it is also a matter of where do we put our efforts? Where do we prioritize our energy right now? I haven't seen that level of disrespect for our elected parliament in the time I've been an MP. I've even had some positive experiences, I'll admit, where Senators Pate and Prissy Clare, for example, helped put pressure on moving the Canada Disability Benefit ahead faster. They actually also introduced an amendment that was really helpful. Unfortunately, our Parliament voted it down, but would have prevented private insurance clawbacks of the Canada Disability Benefit. And the Senate, or the senators on that committee, identified that improvement that we didn't identify in our Parliament. And so I kind of appreciated them for that. So of course, there's pros and cons to all of it. I think my most honest answer to you right now is, while I have some misgivings myself about having an unelected Senate in this country, I'm also mindful of the constitutional implications of a campaign to reform or abolish the Senate, and open to those on the call who are constituents of mine. But when it comes to making progress for folks in Kitchener Centre, I think I can do better to be pushing for electoral reform than for changes to the Senate right now. Might not be the answer you're looking for, but hopefully it's at least an honest answer. On the earlier point, if you've got any research in Finland about the connection between PR and housing outcomes, please feel free to share it, because one of my arguments when I'm talking about proportional representation is trying to make clear for any groups across our community that if they care about their issue, they should also be advocating for PR. And that means when I'm speaking at a climate rally, I bring it up. And when I'm speaking at housing rallies, I try to bring it up also. And so the more research we have that shows that other jurisdictions that have moved to PR have seen better outcomes in these areas, that just kind of better equips me to be making those points. So that'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, we're running out of time, but I've got two more questions. So, Myron, would you address?
Okay. Thank you for the amount of time you devote to electoral reform. I'm concerned about. I'm very concerned about that. I have never understood the gender issue. For many years, I wrote articles to the Canadian Mennonite magazine. Before that, it was called the Mennonite Reporter. I was even part of a group called the Mennonite Distorter. I think that gender issue, now I understand it. I wrote issues, I couldn't understand why all these big social issues were out there. Why was this gender issue so important? I think it's a ticking time bomb. I'm part of a conference, a church. It used to be called the Amish Mennonite Conference. It's not changed its name to Southwestern Ontario Conference. Then it joined with the Ontario Conference, and United Conference became the Conference of Eastern Canada. Churches are leaving the Conference of Eastern Canada over this issue. I can understand it now. People relate to me differently if I'm a man than if I'm a woman. I just read an article in the, I wasn't able to read the full article in the Toronto Star. One of the tactics of getting issues done is to join with other issues. And that protest for 100 million people, there were people wearing shirts saying, "Fuck Trudeau, he's a communist," and all kinds of other populist things. And that's a good strategy. When you go on an issue, you're going to get other people to join on other issues. You want to connect electoral reform to climate change. You want to connect electoral reform to housing. And so the right is using this gender issue, I believe, to collect all these other issues that all the people who are afraid of getting a needle for COVID.
Yeah, Myron, we're going to be talking about that in January, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I really do believe that that gender issue is a ticking time bomb that is just going to explode.
We've got it on our agenda. We're looking at it. Have you anything to say, Mike?
Well, just to say, first of all, how much I appreciate, we've got folks from across the province, and Myron is here as well, lives just down the street from me. So this is democracy, both local and provincial. So Myron, appreciate you being here. And sorry, I heard some feedback there. Is it better now?
That's something strange.
Somebody's mic.
Somebody's got a microphone on. It better unmute everybody, I guess.
Isabel?
Can we try the all mute? Looks like it's clear now.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say that I appreciate you bringing up this issue, in that we have people in our community right now who do not feel safe, and that's not okay. And that includes trans and queer members of our community. For those of you outside of Waterloo Region, we had a pride flag burned at a high school just yesterday. We had a hate crime at the University of Waterloo in June, where a professor was stabbed, and it was a targeted attack based on that she was teaching a gender studies course. And we had this so-called Million Something March. And I was disappointed to see the number of people and the messages we were hearing from that march. And so I do think it's a really important issue. I think it's one that we can all be mindful of, making sure that everyone in our community, and this includes, we can talk about the trans and queer community, but women as well who don't feel safe, that Waterloo Region is one of the least safe place for women in Canada. And so we need to be doing more to stand up against gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. We need to be standing alongside the trans community. We need to be standing alongside anyone in our community who doesn't feel safe, and in ensuring we call out hate when we see it, and we call out the kind of rhetoric that leads towards the attack we saw a few months ago. And so I'm glad this group is going to be talking about it as a group of people focused on social justice. I think it's really important that y'all are talking about it, and recognizing that we've got a lot of work to do alongside the other issues we've also been talking about throughout this afternoon.
Thank you.
So I guess it's time for Colin. And a last question. Oh. Well, Colin, we can't hear you.
Colin, can you write your question in the chat? Okay. All right, Jim. Jim,
Thanks. Thanks, Colin. So the question I'm seeing here is, what is the issue that's preventing more housing co-ops? And Colin, sorry for the tech issues. Maybe one day we'll do one of these in person and won't have to deal with the tech. Maybe I can also just pause to say thanks to those who are helping with the tech. Technology can both be a really helpful thing. It can also get in the way. And so appreciate Jim and Evan and others that are helping with that. Oh, right on, Colin. You're at Brighton Yards. So it's actually one of the more straightforward answers. The issue that's getting in the way is federal and provincial investments, consistent investments in co-op housing. So my understanding, if you look at the numbers from the 1980s, every single year there was a reliable amount that CMHC invested in co-op housing. It led to around 6% of new rental construction was co-op housing every single year. What is different now is it's one-off investments. Governments pat themselves on the back and then they move on. So I'll give you the example. It's not that they're investing nothing. And I try to avoid this duality of government bad and government good. It's not that they're doing nothing at all. In budget 2022, there was $1.5 billion set aside for co-op housing. It's great. The unfortunate reality is that in budget 2023, there was $0 for co-op housing. In fact, there was $0 for any new housing. The only money for housing in budget 2023 was a future-loaded investment in Indigenous housing. I mean to say that the money doesn't start until future years, nothing in 2023. I don't think it's appropriate that any level of government, let alone the federal government that has the largest budget of any, take a year off from funding housing. I don't think they should take a year off from funding co-op housing. But then the additional issue, Colin, if I'm really just honest with you, is even that 2022 investment, we've yet to see a single dollar invested in building co-ops from it. They're still in the midst of figuring out how they're going to. So maybe part of the issue is when you only invest once every 30 years, it's like running a festival. It's harder to find you're starting it up from scratch again. And of course, it's going to take you longer to get the money and design it and build it because you're not used to that level of dollars. And so I'm both disappointed, not only that it's a one-off, but because it's a one-off and how much harder it is to get the money rolled out. You are going to see new co-ops get built. A $1.5 billion infusion is going to see some units. We're going to advocate for Waterloo Region to see some of those units, but I worry that you're going to hear from the governing party this idea that everything's fine because of this one investment. And I think those of us who care about housing and who know the benefits of co-op housing should be making clear that this is a good investment and we expect to see it every single year. And every single year we don't see it, we should be marching, we should be advocating, writing your MP to say that you expect them to invest. I love talking about co-ops because it just removes this mythology that we need to always innovate, that it always needs to be some fancy new idea. Sometimes you don't need a fancy new idea. You actually just need to use the things that worked and put money behind them. So I guess it's political will, but Colin's really just about money. We need to see federal and provincial governments investing in co-ops because we know that they work.
Well, I think with that, Mike, I have to thank you for coming by, and I thank everybody who participated. It's taking a pretty well half the afternoon, I guess, of people's time when they could be outside in the beautiful weather. Anyway, thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to just unshare the screen or what? Here we go. Share. So, thank you. And now we go to our next meeting. Our next meeting is October 28th, and it's Chris Scott, the Director of the Government and Stakeholder Relations for Dying with Dignity in Canada. He's going to talk about the state of the assisted dying file, including a detailed analysis of the major changes in the criminal code. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say because it's been an issue. As I'm getting older, I'm becoming more and more aware of it. And now we extinguish the chalice. Are you ready, Joy?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay, so we've done a lot of wonderful work today, and so may the memory. Can you see my chalice?
No, just read the readings.
May the memory of the light that has been shed today on proportional representation and affordable, accessible housing burn brightly as we go forward to help make an equitably conscious Canada. So may it be.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a list of some resources if you want to write them down quickly. But they'll all be available. We'll be sending out a newsletter with the recording if it worked. And you should get that later on the week, next week.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks again. Thanks again for the invite, Jim. This was actually really special to get some time with you all. I appreciate you putting me in your list. And for those of you in Waterloo Region, we got our Schneider Creek porch party this afternoon. It's a beautiful day. Hope to maybe get to see some of you out there, particularly after we've spent some time in front of a computer screen. Hope you get to enjoy some of it. But most of all, just thanks again to you, Jim, and to the organizers for having me.
Well, thank you especially for coming. I appreciate it. Anyway, see you next month.
Bye-bye.